Good morning. I want to thank everybody for being with us here today for a very important announcement. Also want to thank the participants with me at the table. To my right, we have the Texas Border Czar, Mike Banks. To my left is the Director of the Texas Department of Public Safety, Steve McCraw. And we also have with us Chris Cabrera, the Vice President for the National Border Patrol Council. We're here today to talk about a dangerous, maybe even a deadly threat facing both our state as well as our country. It's the recent entry and expansion of the vicious Venezuelan gang known as Tren de Aragua, also known as TDA. Officials are concerned about what is going on with TDA. Its recent expansion and entry of this gang could destabilize public safety in the United States as well as in the state of Texas. For us, in law enforcement across the state, our top priority is the security and the safety of our fellow Texans. This is a nonpartisan, bipartisan issue that everybody agrees upon, that we need to aggressively address this threatening challenge. TDA is characterized as MS-13 on steroids. TDA is the largest criminal organization in Venezuela. It started as a prison gang in the state of Aragua, Venezuela, and has now expanded to a transnational criminal organization. Now they are dominating the international flow of migrants from South America through Mexico into the United States. I'm not seeing that one up here. Well, if you look at two maps over, or two charts over from me, that shows South America to the U.S., that shows the current status of the flow and operation of TDA across South America, Central America, and now North America. TDA is notorious for their brutal violence and murder, and their kidnapping, extortion, bribery, and trafficking of drugs, weapons, and even humans. They've been linked to more than 100 law enforcement investigations across the country. They were involved in the brutal attack and assault upon New York Police Department law enforcement officers. Reports have also linked TDA to the murder of Lincoln Riley. Intelligence reports show TDA has been given the green light to shoot law enforcement officers in the United States. In other countries infiltrated by TDA, history has shown they first flood the countries with military-age Venezuelan men. Next, they begin to establish a base of operations. Finally, TDA begins a spree of violent and bloody criminal activity. We've now seen the beginnings of these operations in the state of Texas. The second to last map that you see on your left-hand side are locations in the state of Texas where we have identified either known or suspected TDA activity in the state of Texas. Since 2021, more than 3,000 illegal immigrants from Venezuela have been arrested in Texas, and another more than 200 are wanted. There is currently no TDA database to be able to verify if these arrests are of TDA members or non-TDA members. So, what the Texas Department of Public Safety is working on, as well as other law enforcement, they're working to create a database from scratch. They're doing that by watching for suspected TDA activity that matches the known methods of operation of confirmed TDA activity in other countries. We will build that database by looking at common traits shared by TDA. You see on a chart right here some of those characteristics. They include tattoos, scars, marks, types of crime, methods of operation. Now, importantly, today, I'm announcing what Texas is doing to stop the spread of TDA in our state. I ordered the Texas Department of Public Safety to launch a statewide operation directly targeting TDA to deter and to disrupt their criminal operations in Texas. DPS is collaborating with federal and local law enforcement through the Texas Anti-Gang Centers. When I became governor of Texas, there was one anti-gang center to crack down on gang activity in our state. Today, there are now 9 anti-gang centers across the state in Dallas-Fort Worth, El Paso, Houston, Laredo, Lubbock, McAllen, San Antonio, Tyler, and Waco. You will see those locations on this map over here. Also, I signed laws that provide more than $100 million to support these anti-gang centers over just the next 2 years. But to more directly target TDA, I directed DPS to elevate TDA to a Tier 1 gang, the worst of the worst, ensuring that DPS deploys the resources that are needed to corral this growing menace. Already, we're making arrests of suspected TDA members. For example, recently El Paso residents were concerned about criminal activity at the Gateway Hotel in El Paso. In the last few months, DPS special agents worked with the El Paso Police Department gang units to arrest criminal activity at and around El Paso's Gateway Hotel. More than 20 arrests were made, many of whom were suspected TDA members for charges that include human smuggling, prostitution, possession of illegal drugs, as well as other crimes. And now, the Gateway Hotel in El Paso has been shut down. And earlier this year, more than 100 suspected TDA members were arrested after the riots at the El Paso border when immigrants assaulted the Texas National Guard. Also today, I am officially declaring TDA a foreign terrorist organization. We will bring the full weight of the government against the TDA. By declaring TDA a foreign terrorist organization, Texas will use the courts to halt their operations, use civil asset forfeiture to take their property, use enhanced criminal penalties to keep them in jail behind bars for longer periods of time. At this time, I'm going to sign that proclamation. Texas is aggressively going after these foreign terrorist organizations of TDA. Texas will also use a newly passed law in our state to impose a mandatory minimum of at least 10 years behind bars against TDA gang members who smuggle people into Texas. Also, I directed the DPS to create a new TDA strike team made of highway patrol officers, DPS special agents, Texas Rangers, SWAT teams, including aircraft, helicopters, and drones, K-9 teams, and intelligence units. These strike teams will collaborate with Texas anti-gang center law enforcement officers to surge resources to areas where known or suspected TDA activity is taking place. Together, they will seek to identify and arrest TDA gang members. Our goal among law enforcement in the state of Texas is to defend our state from the growing threat of TDA. We are not going to allow them to use Texas as a base of operations to terrorize our citizens. Texas is a law and order state, and I will ensure that law enforcement has every tool they need to keep our community safe. At this time, I will turn it over to Director McCraw of the Texas Department of Public Safety.
Governor, thank you. Tren, Aragua, TDA, gangsters are like cockroaches. They multiply quickly. Small intrusions into communities become infestations if not aggressively pursued. These Venezuelan thugs, as the governor noted, are highly combative. They're violent. They're certainly adaptable, and they always are involved in situations, criminal activities that first start with human smuggling. Then not just human smuggling, but human smuggling of migrants, and whether it's in South America or Central America, and certainly on the Texas border. They are involved in the extortion, kidnappings, rape, assaults, and sex trafficking of migrants. Once in place, they expand their criminal operations. We've seen it around the state. To try to get a foothold, and when we talk about expanding their criminal operations, they're talking about pushing out other criminal gangs operating in that area. Governor Abbott has made it very clear is that we'll not allow any of these TDA gangsters to gain a foothold in Texas. To that end, Texas anti-gang centers already have ongoing criminal enterprise investigations against TDA in all of the operational areas throughout the state. We're requesting that our federal partners provide us information on the whereabouts of these Venezuelan migrants. That's very important because, unfortunately, you're either a TDA member or a victim of TDA. This information will be extremely helpful in identifying additional TDA members and their victims. I mean, some people find it harsh using the term, infestation and cockroaches and things like that. All you have to do is interview or spend some time with some victims, some migrant victims that are here in this country. You'll understand that the governor has not overstated the issue. In fact, he has well stated the issue. And Texas is not going to allow any part of this state to be infested with that type of disease.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Governor.
Sure. Now, Chris Cabrera with the National Border Patrol Council.
Thank you, Governor. I could sit up here and throw statistics at you and give you numbers as far as how many people are crossing and how many are gotaways, but none of that would really matter when dealing with the issue that we have here. With this gang, it's not they're not like traditional like MS-13s where you can see them coming a mile away with the crazy tattoos they have all over their faces. These guys fly under the radar. As a federal agent, we have no way of vetting these people other than the honor system. If they tell us they're from so-and-so and this is their name, we can't check against Venezuela's database. They're not going to give us access to it, so we have to let them go. Unfortunately, we do let them go. In the off chance we're going to deport them, Venezuela decides they're not going to take them back, so our government on the federal level is kind of weak-minded, and so we just go ahead and, okay, well, you go ahead and stay here then. And it's unfortunate what we're seeing. It is an infestation. It's taking hold, not just in Colorado or New York. It's up in Michigan, Florida, Texas, you name it. It's spreading. And what people fail to realize is working on the border, we see everything come through, but it doesn't affect us as much as it affects the rest of the United States, especially Houston. Everything that comes through our area just passes through and it ends up as your problem or a problem somewhere up north. And if people don't wake up and see it for what it is, we're going to be in a lot of trouble in this country.
Thank you. Now the Texas Board Czar, Mike Banks.
Good afternoon. I want to be very clear that a TDA problem in Texas and the rest of the United States is a direct result of open border policies. The Biden-Harris administration has sent out an all call to the world that you can cross this border without any consequences. Think about it for a moment. There are 195 known countries in this world, and in the last 3+ years, we've had 169 of those countries cross illegally into this country. Then you talk about Venezuela, that being one of those countries where it is a known fact that the Venezuelan government has released prisoners with one condition: you leave Venezuela and don't come back. Well, then they answer the all call from this administration. They show up here. So there's no surprise that we have a criminal illegal gang problem in the United States. And thankfully, we're addressing that. Talk about vetting. You get the federal government will tell you, the Biden, Harris, and Secretary Mayorkas will tell you that they're vetting everyone they're releasing. That is an absolute lie, because they cannot vet them against their criminal history in Venezuela, because Venezuela refuses to share that information with us, because it would defeat the very purpose of releasing them to go into another country if they were going to be held because of that criminal history. So, Governor Abbott has been at the forefront of this open border crisis. This is nothing that we haven't been talking about since OLS started back in March. We knew that these are the types of things that are going to happen when you have an open border and you allow everyone in the country without proper vetting. Thankfully, we've had a strong legislature that has given us many of the laws that the governor's talked about here today that we're using to go after TDA. And so I want to thank the legislature, and then also want to thank the governor for having the moral courage to continue fighting this fight and doing everything we can to protect Texas and the rest of the United States. And we're not going to stop until Biden-Harris administration steps up and honors their oath of office, which is to protect America and Americans first. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take a few questions. Go ahead.
Governor, thank you for having this briefing. I was curious about the timing of addressing TDA now. It's been in the news in Colorado, obviously, and former President Trump and Jay Vance had mentioned it on the campaign. Can you address the timing of this and why you're bringing it up?
Well, because over the past year, we've seen slow but increasing activity by TDA in our state. As I pointed out, several months ago, we began the arrests of TDA or suspected TDA members in the state of Texas. With the increased flow, we've had to not only expand our efforts, but add to the crackdown by doing things like declaring them a foreign terrorist organization, using enhanced tools, using these anti-gang centers to prioritize. Their top job at the anti-gang centers is to go after these TDA members. The fact of the matter is, this is something that has exploded in the aftermath of when the president said, if you're from Venezuela, you're going to be allowed into the United States. As Mike Banks was explaining, as also Colonel McCraw were explaining, there is no database. Like if Border Patrol, arrest or encounters a person from Venezuela, they may think or suspect that could be a TDA member, but there's no database to be able to determine that and confirm that. Part of this effort now, because of the increased number of military-aged men from Venezuela crossing our border who seem to have all the characteristics of a TDA member, we are going about the process of establishing that database so we can track them, follow them, and see what their modus of operation is, so that hopefully they will lead to documentation of verified TDA members that also can lead to arrests and putting them behind bars.
Governor, can you describe what is the documented and suspected TDA activity in the Houston area? I see it's marked on the board over there. And then should Texans just assume that any young man who's come over from Venezuela, given that we've already said they're hard to identify, are members or suspected members of this criminal organization?
On your first part of your question, I'll have Director McCraw talk about what's happening in Houston. Second, there's should be no, like, say, immediate reason why someone should be able to classify or suspect a person as a TDA member. Look at this chart right here. Those provide some, not all, but some of the characteristics of TDA members. You know that, like MS-13 gang members, they have certain traits, certain tattoos, certain markers and things like that that raise suspicion they're probable MS-13 members. Same thing goes with Tren de Aragua, and that is that there are characteristics, methods of operation, but maybe most significantly, when you add these markers to one of the leading things they do, and that is they come into a country, they will smuggle people into the country, they will then engage in human trafficking. We feel when you add all that together, we're dealing with a TDA member. We want to arrest them and see if maybe they'll confess or see if other things occur that will lead to a TDA member. Even with that said, even if they don't confess to being a TDA member, because of what they have done in the United States, that makes them a criminal for which they should be arrested and prosecuted. But on the first part of your questions about Houston, I'll have Colonel McCraw address that.
Yes, it's not just in Houston, but around the state. What we've seen is TDA members, what they'll do is they'll infiltrate areas by following migrants that they exploited at the border, they continue to exploit, including the sex trafficking of children. That's where it starts with. Okay, then they quickly expand and multiply. And at that point in time is when they engage in other criminal activities. And there is no, I've said opportunistic before, there is no limit to what those criminal activities are. It's just all about profit in that regard. And once they have and sell and fully established in that regard, they threaten the other criminal gangs and more victims. And what do TDA members look like? Well, they look like Americans, is what they look like, plain and simple. So we focus on the criminal activity. And if you're a Venezuelan national, come here illegally, and you come between the ports of entry, you've been apprehended by Border Patrol and released into the United States because there's no proper way of vetting them, at that point in time, okay, it depends on whether they're a migrant, okay, a victim, an associate, or a TDA member. They don't have a lot of rival gangs in Venezuela like the U.S. They're not talking about the Aryan Brotherhood, Aryan Circle, so forth and so on. They basically have monopolized, okay, crime in Venezuela and exported it to Chile, Peru, and Colombia. And about 2018 is when they became transnational. And the federal government has designated them as certainly a transnational criminal organization. So they understand the threat the federal government does. Unfortunately, we're not getting much help if you're going to allow them into the country.
Forgive me, but you presented a map of Texas with a documented TDA activity marked in the Houston area.
Right.
Is that what that particular red dot means?
Exactly. You see both you see suspected, and you see also actual through
What is this, the actual documented crime in the Houston area? Please explain.
trafficking, extortion, kidnapping, a variety of different crimes that they've been involved in, but always on the front end. And that's why El Paso is kind of the center of gravity right now. MS-13, MS-18, it was Houston because of the large relocation of Central Americans in this area. El Paso, Venezuela, is really ground zero at that point. One, because they continue to support the Juarez-related gangs involved in smuggling of people across the border. They combat with us. We deal with them daily in that regard. And as the governor pointed out, the riot that was created by TDA members and other associates from Venezuela that overran the guard positions, that's the type of attitude. When we talk about highly combative, anti-law enforcement, they combat security forces around the world. So it's a different animal, if you will, and understandably why the governor's concerned and expects us to be very proactive in addressing this particular threat.
Go ahead.
As you all mentioned, some of the victims of these crimes are often migrants.
Yep.
I'm interested to hear what is law enforcement doing to make sure that these migrants feel comfortable coming forward, especially if there's other things happening in the state, like potentially asking for on the horizon.
Well, it's important that we communicate, certainly in Spanish, okay, how they can report, certainly to the local law enforcement officials, but also in terms of iWatch, any criminal activity. I mean, they're here, they've been let into the country by the U.S. government, so they're here essentially legally now, and they have rights like any people do. And certainly we want to know if there's been a violation of law or if they're a victim of it. In fact, we encourage any migrant that has come to Texas and has been brutalized by TDA or other Venezuelan criminals to report that to local law enforcement as quick as possible, or the Department of Public Safety. And I can tell you that we're working very closely, as the governor noted, in these Texas anti-gang centers with our local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies. And there are substantial progress in some of the investigations, but there's too much more work to be done.
Also, we often see an outcry for help from migrants who are being trafficked, who are being sexually assaulted, who are just pleading for somebody to help them and to do something about their attackers.
Just to follow up on that, is there any concern that there's other policies or other things going on in Texas that could affect how comfortable migrants feel coming forward to collaborate?
We haven't seen anything like that yet.
One more question, folks.
Can I just also, thanks. Just to follow up, Governor, and the rest of y'all about the recent reports that we've seen about TDA in Colorado. Was it a concern that you feel like these folks are coming up through Texas into other states? And maybe if you could address some of what former President Trump has talked about, because he's been talking about this as a national problem. Are you trying to sort of cut that off in Texas?
So obviously what happened in Colorado was very serious. Obviously what happened in El Paso is very serious. Obviously we now have either suspected or documented TDA members in the state of Texas. We know for what's happening nationally as well as internationally, the seriousness of TDA. We know that if we don't stop this now, it could spread rapidly across our state, endangering people across our state. We want to get ahead of that process and cut this off right now and make sure TDA understands when they come to the state of Texas, they're going to face the heavy hand of law enforcement with a robust, literally hundreds, if you count all the local law enforcement, thousands of law enforcement officers who are focused on TDA. They have a target on their back, and we're going after them. We have one goal, and that is to arrest them and make them understand that Texas is the wrong state for them to be trying to do business in.
Great, thanks everyone.